Good morning, and thank you, Minister, for your contribution. As my colleague Deputy Whitmore did say, there is some degree of merit in the proposals before us, and the bill before us, 1.7 billion investment, will do some good, but that needs to be placed against the context of the level of suffering and need in this country. And the fact that this 1.7 billion wasn't targeted means that people will continue to choose between heating and eating in this country, and that's something that cannot go unchallenged, and it will not go unchallenged by the Social Democrats. Today, for example, Focus Ireland said more people will become homeless if the government doesn't act now. Last week, Spark and One Parent Family Association said that the budget was the most regressive for one-parent families, traditionally the most vulnerable group in this country. And it's in the context of that we're going to be speaking up. So when Deputy Whitmore highlights what I'm going to call the holiday home dividend, we see where the government's priorities are in this country. We all know that inflation will wipe out the effects of these energy credits within several weeks at most, never mind 6 months, pushing thousands of families not only closer to the edge of poverty, but closer to the point of survival, which is what the St Vincent de Paul called it in their report in March of this year, the cost of survival for some in this country. The money many families would have saved from these measures would already be gone by the time they come into effect. The government had a choice last month. They could have done more to prevent gas and electricity bills from crippling families, or they could continue to ignore the needs of those on the margins. If the government targeted energy credits properly, low and middle income households could have benefited from a more suitable amount of savings. But as it stands, the relief the credits will provide will be gone as soon as you arrive. And yeah, 62,000 homes will get a second holiday home dividend of over €600. You faced criticism in February for not targeting energy credits, and you haven't learned from what I've wrote down to be mistakes. But is it a mistake, Minister? Is it a mistake, or was it purposely done? I mean, it's often said you show us your budget and we'll show you your priorities in this country, and we can't step away from the fact that 1 in 5 people are suffering from poverty, and 62,000 holiday homemakers are going to get €600 extra. Minister Eamon Ryan admitted that then and owners of holiday homes were given the same energy credits as those struggling to keep the lights on and the heat on because the measure was rushed as a matter of emergency in March. The crisis and the emergency continues, but there was time to be considered to concentrate those in the margins, but the government chose not to. Over 7 months later, millionaires who own several properties are getting tax breaks, while on the record a number of people are going without a home, and rising homeless rates and poverty rates continue to rise. The government had a year to adjust and fix this measure, and they failed, and it's the worst half will face the consequences of that. Once again, I wrote mistakes, but I'm going to question myself. Was it a mistake or was it a choice? What have you been doing all this time? Did you choose to ignore the scheme's flaws out of laziness, or do you intend to make the rich richer when more and more people languish in poverty? And Minister, poverty is a word that's often said in this. We sometimes use it with euphemisms in this country. We call it the cost of living crisis. But poverty is very real. It attacks the senses of everybody who's experiencing it. It's corrosive to the human condition. And 1 in 5 people in this country are experiencing that. It's hunger. It's inadequate action to basic provisions like a second jacket. It's struggling to keep the lights on this winter. You've chosen the budget to blindly give the same amount of help to those who don't need it and to those who need much more to keep their head above water. By doing so, you've put money into the pockets of the well-off, while the most vulnerable in society face unimaginable struggle. This government has shown a lack of nuance, an absence of competency and compassion, while drawing up plans for what may prove to be one of the most difficult winters in decades. We should have seen a pandemic-scale response in this budget, but we didn't. As I said to the Taoiseach earlier today, we've all received messages from several people in my constituency today, yesterday, last week, and I guarantee tomorrow and next week too, who are going homeless, facing the ever-increasing cost of survival in this country. How on earth can a government throw millions on millions at millionaires who have holidays homes when more and more children are going without a home? It's unfathomable. Once again, it's those on high incomes who will be most rewarded by the government, with tax cuts and an array of universal lump sum payments that disproportionately benefit the better off. Temporary supports and lump sums will not help people in the medium to long term, not the people who need it the most and are crying out the most for assistance. They will not provide sustainable relief to those who can no longer afford the soaring prices of basic necessities like food, like a warm coat, fuel and rent. Those struggling are being left to suffer on all fronts. For example, in the midst of the worst cost of living crisis in a generation, the government only increased core social welfare rates by €12. The across-the-board failure of Budget 23 will have devastating consequences across the country, and the blame lies with the government and its incompetency, and yet you'll be cheered on by 62,000 people who have holiday homes who will receive an extra €600.